Today we're going to be talking about the litigious activity happening in the state of California for supplements and for foods, in particular California Proposition 65, which is very popular in the supplement and conventional foods arena. Now, before we get into that, this is your first time here. My name is Brian, and it's good to meet you all. I've been in the supplement industry since 2004, specializing in regulatory affairs and quality assurance, and I'm here to help you navigate FDA, FTC compliance requirements for your supplement brand. So with that in mind, let's dive into California Proposition 65, the enforcement summary as of October 2023. So it is a little bit behind, but that's okay. They do update this page on the regular, so I anticipate new data for 2024, but this is a really good snapshot of what the violations were with regards to Prop 65, the types of products are getting hit, the types of chemicals that are being caught. Now, it's important for us to understand what California Prop 65 is, and I'm going to dive into that right now. And the big thing here is to know that if you are selling products in California, then this state law applies to you. It doesn't matter where your business is structured. If you're selling into California, Proposition 65 is a thing for you, okay? And what this law is essentially it's a right to know requirement, meaning that the customer or the consumer needs to know about whether your product has one of the chemicals in this Proposition 65. And if it does, you need to notify your customers and your consumers through proper labeling. And it needs to be very conspicuous. Now, here's the thing with Proposition 65. There are a lot of chemicals on this list, and they're constantly adding chemicals to there. Right now, they're close to about 1,000 chemicals that, based on their research or whatever database that they've been using, they've determined these chemicals are either going to cause birth defects, cause cancer, and other things like of that nature. And if your product has those chemicals or it surpasses a certain threshold that Prop 65 has determined, then you need to have a particular warning statement on your label, and it's something to the effect of, this product contains lead, which is known in the state of California to cause cancer or birth defects. Now, there's very specific requirements on how it's supposed to be labeled, the formatting of it, where it needs to be placed, all these other things. But essentially, it's a right to know law. So it's not about removing it out of the product or getting rid of these chemicals or reducing the chemicals. It's essentially saying you can keep those chemicals in there. You just have to make sure that it's properly labeled so the consumer is informed prior to purchase. That's really what it's saying. Now, the big thing is that while this is a very common thing in the state of California, those that buy your product outside of California, if they see a statement like this product contains lead, which is known to cause birth defects, that's quite off-putting. So a lot of brands either don't know about California Prop 65, so they don't put that warning statement on there, or some brands are like, well, that's going to just shoot us in the foot while we do that. Okay, so that's Prop 65, and essentially what's happening is that there are lawyers out there that have seen a lot of products that don't have this statement. And so what happens is that these lawyers go and sue these brands, and it's been happening for the last 2 decades, right? I've been involved in a lot of Prop 65 issues in the past, and bear in mind, when we're talking about litigation activity, this is just one example. There are other brands that are getting sued for other reasons outside of Prop 65, but we just know that California is a very litigious state. And so when they sue you, right, they send you these notices of violation. They're expecting you to fix your product, put the warning label, the warning statement on your label, reformulate the product, and as well as pay them some money, the settlement fee, right, to address this issue. Because essentially the lawyers are saying, look, you're not following the laws, you're not protecting the health of the consumers, that type of thing. And so they're going after these brands. And I would say that these settlements, they're a distraction, a big distraction, and they're very costly, not just for the settlement itself, 6 figures easily, but it's also going to cost you a ton of money on legal fees, and the discussions and negotiations can last several months to a year. I've seen some lawyers, essentially the ones that are suing other brands, some of these lawyers are out there. This is their entire business model. In some cases, some lawyers, they do generally want to protect the public and make sure that these brands are complying. But there's some controversy around this Proposition 65. But regardless, let's dive into the table here because, I really want to focus on the common ones in the supplement space. And if you look at it here, at least based on this table, we've had 195 violations, right, versus September, which was 152. So you had a bit of a spike. And what are people getting sued for? Well, when it comes to supplements, right, and protein powders, which I would argue is, can fall into that category, a lot of the violations are pertaining to heavy metals, in particular lead, cadmium, and arsenic. So essentially what this means is that, your supplement might contain lead that is above a particular threshold as identified by Proposition 65. And you better have that warning statement. And if you don't, well, you're going to get a notice of violation from a lawyer, and they're going to sue you. And essentially, they're going to ask you to pay for the settlement, fix up your labels, and formulate or reformulate, and also have testing to prove all of this is compliant. And this is big business, all right? I mean, this is big business in terms of the settlement fees, right, that these law firms make from this activity. But also, it's just, like I said, it's a huge distraction. It's very common. And when we're talking about botanical ingredients, when we're talking about protein powders, right, with botanical ingredients, you're going to get natural uptake of heavy metals that are in the soil. So you're going to have some chemicals. Like, there's no supplement in the market that is absolutely free of any of these chemicals. There could be a very, 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 very small amount in there, like to the point where, parts per trillion. But in the language of Prop 65, it's just absence or presence in some of these cases. So if you detect it, no matter how small, technically speaking, a lot of these chemicals will trigger the warning statement, right? And then when it comes to protein powders, right, big dosage forms, because of the sheer quantity, the intake of some of these heavy metals are naturally going to be higher than, say, one capsule or 2 capsule serving size. Now, here's the other, dare I say, controversial component to it, and that is the threshold for some of these ingredients, where there is a threshold. Some ingredients don't have a threshold. It's just like, if it's there, you got to have the warning statement, all right? But for some, there are thresholds. The threshold, unfortunately, is so tight that it could still mandate these warning letters. And when I say it's so tight, there's been FDA tests where they test like just random food, random vegetables, broccoli, spinach, mushrooms, etc. And the heavy metals in those tests technically are above what you would find in the thresholds set by Prop 65. Okay, so it's not like the amount of heavy metals you're ingesting is abnormally high. It's just that it's higher than the threshold set by Proposition 65. And so you could be eating spinach, raw broccoli, you could eat a cup of that, and that could technically contain more heavy metals, more lead, and that is higher than the threshold set by Prop 65. Just to give you context here, all right? So I don't want you to think that Proposition 65 is trying to identify the really, really high levels of arsenic or cadmium. I mean, it could, but also there are a lot of companies that get sued when they have fairly low amounts, but they're technically over the threshold. Now you see here, you've got titanium dioxide, BPA, phthalates, heavy metals. Now, in this particular table, they do say that, the list chemicals, the heavy metals, is primarily found in the protein powders. Like, the notices of violation are targeting supplements, and in particular of that, we're looking at heavy metal claims. And then whereas in phthalates, you're seeing this more on the claims for wallets, shoes, purses, etc. And that's where the notice of violations are really focusing in on that. But just know that this is just a summary of the notices of violation. Technically, Prop 65 doesn't differentiate between the product categories. So for example, if you had phthalates in your supplements, technically it would be then required for you to have that warning statement. All right. So I just want this table to be clarified that this is just showing you a summary of the notice of violation. Doesn't necessarily mean that, this is saying that if it's a phthalate and it's in supplements, therefore you don't have to make the warning statement because, this particular table is saying, oh, it's only for pouches, bags, purses, etc. Same thing for PFOS, PFOAs, titanium dioxide. Like, you would find some supplements with titanium dioxide, so technically that could trigger the warning statement. And so when we're doing label review and we're doing formula review, it's important to figure out how do you engineer to make sure that your product is compliant with Prop 65, which is something that we do handle with our clients. And it's not normally considered, right? When you're thinking about formulations, you're thinking about what claims to get, what are the right ingredients, what are the therapeutic amounts. But something that we do factor in is this whole Prop 65 equation and formulating to hit these particular targets to minimize the risk. I mean, with Prop 65, there could be another chemical that's added 6 months from now that you could be vulnerable to. We just don't know what chemical is, but until then, we're trying to hit what are the chemicals that are most likely for your particular ingredient, for your particular product, and then how do we minimize the risk for Prop 65. So it's definitely something that we factor in when we're helping customers from the get-go, from the concept, the formulation stage, all the way through the label development component, right? The label review component. We want to make sure at least there's some sort of check so that you as the client is definitely informed about all of these things. I do think that that's important. So as I mentioned, in the state of California, a lot of consumers are used to this warning statement. Where it gets a little bit tricky is that if you're selling this outside of the state of California, it's really hard for you to have a unique label, right, across all the different states. Usually, if you're e-commerce, you just have one website, right? And it's hard to direct your California visitors to a California page. So some brands, what they do is they have like a Prop 65 warning on there at the risk of turning off their customers. The customers might not understand this. They don't get, they don't have a reference point. If you were to say that your product tested for 0.5 micrograms of lead, they don't know if that's high or low. They just think it's bad. And so it's really, it's a balancing act for sure. There's also an education component that I think a lot of brands are trying to balance. And I'm starting to see more and more brands put this warning statement on their website, maybe some on their label. My goodness, it's a tough one, especially when, like I said, in many of the cases, the protein powder, the supplements, the actual amount of heavy metals in the product isn't high. It's actually very consistent with any other food. The problem is the way Prop 65 is written and how it targets it. And essentially it's saying, look, if your product undergoes processing, if it's man-made, Prop 65 does apply to you. Whereas, an orange or a spinach, broccoli, that's completely natural. So that's a different scenario. So that's kind of how Prop 65 differentiates between the two. And that's why supplements are very vulnerable to this. Protein powders are very vulnerable to this. Coffees are very vulnerable to this. And the other component to keep in mind is that your manufacturer knows this stuff. They know that, you might get sued, and you'll find in the fine print, like, hey, we're not going to be responsible from a Prop 65 standpoint like you are. Which again goes back to the importance of, well, all right, chances are the sales rep or the R&D department's not factoring Prop 65 into the whole R&D process. Typically what they're doing is like, oh, you just tell us what you want, your sub-facts, and we'll do it for you. And they're relying on you to just tell them. They're not going to bring up this stuff. A, it's going to slow down the sales process, and B, they know it's going to be more complicated, and they don't want anything to do with it. They just want to get that order out. They just want that purchase order in and inventory made for you. So, they're incentivized to not bring these things up, but in the fine print of the contract, they'll have it in there where they'll say, you're going to indemnify us. We're not going to be responsible for any Prop 65 matters, which again is why we work with the clients and try to get ahead of all these things, because we want to protect you. So anyway, that's Prop 65. Again, this is just one example as to why, the litigious activity that's happening in the state of California. There are other states that have litigious activity, but I would argue that California is one of those special ones that has a lot more activity than other states. But anyway, hopefully you found this information useful. And if you want to work together, we can do a consultation. Definitely check out my SET program for those that are new to the supplement space. They want to get in there, just not sure what margins to build in, what are all the things that factor in, how contract manufacturers work. Do you want access to our manufacturer's directory? It's all in the SET program, as well as we can chat on that in our one-on-one consults too. All right, I'm going to leave it there. It was a pleasure, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.